Right, and as I mentioned earlier, we are now delighted to be joined on set with the Treasury Principal Secretary, that is Dr. Chris Kiptoo. Daktari, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
I know it's been a long day and this is a huge sacrifice on your part. Thank you so much.
Quite a big one.
Thank you for that, Daktari. It did not escape my notice that we, of course, had the budget speech for FY 23-24 being presented today. And yesterday we had supplementary budget 2 books being tabled by in the National Assembly as well. That looks like a very tight schedule considering we only have 2 weeks to the close of this financial year. Could you just give us some snippet into what necessitated supplementary budget 2 first?
Normally, supplementary is undertaken when there is a need to revise the initial budget that had been passed by Parliament. And we have had to do this because of the developments that have occurred. When this government took over, of course, it took a while to stabilize, to start forming, and then we had a supplementary. Yeah. As you are aware, this government decided to pursue a fiscal consolidation path, which is to try and reduce debt. So in that supplementary, the main theme was to try and cut expenditure. And you recall the famous 300 billion that we had to undergo as a government. Remember, in June, when last year when the Parliament passed the budget, we were talking over a budget of about 3.4 trillion, yeah, and expenditure of revenues of around 2.5 trillion. So we had a budget deficit, which in GDP terms amounted to 6.2%. This government decided to shrink the expenditure. Yeah. And so by the supplementary one resulted in a revised budget that had a budget deficit of 5.7% of GDP. And that is the budget we've been implementing. Yes. And of course, given that you are talking about a budget, it means the revenues are not enough, yep, and so you have to borrow. Yes. So sources of funding for the budget had to come from taxes and also from borrowing. Correct. And we have had challenges on those 2 fronts. Yes. You may be aware that domestic financing conditions have been very tight because of the environment most countries have faced, where we have had multiple shocks. Yep. First, we had COVID-19, and you remember the supply shocks that came about it. And before we could settle, we had the Ukraine war in Eastern Europe that even made the situation worse because it led to increase in prices of key commodities, yeah, like petroleum, food prices, fertilizer, edible oil, and many others. Okay. That made prices to go up, and the response by countries to deal with that inflationary pressure is to tighten monetary policy. And tightening monetary policy means increasing interest rates. Correct. And many countries have had to do that. And because of that situation, many currencies have weakened, yes, against the US dollar, including ours. Yes. And so there has been a bit of money is not coming into Kenya but getting out, just like many other countries into the US. So we had from the budget deficit that of 5.7, we needed to borrow to fund our budget about $828 billion. I mean billion shillings. Shillings, yes. And out of that, we had a target of 438 to borrow domestically, and the balance to borrow externally. Yes. Now we have done well on the external front. We were able to get the monies we targeted through syndicated. We also got the money from World Bank, which we had put, DPO, which just came recently. Yes. And the IMF. We can say, and the IMF and all that. So we have done well 100% on the external. Yeah. On the domestic, we struggled. Yes. It was really a challenge because in fact, every revenue we got, we had to pay maturities which were coming. Okay. In fact, I was doing calculations in the last 5 months. All the revenues we have collected 6.7 shillings, 6 shillings and 70 cents have had to go to pay debt.
Correct.
Because of maturing debt. So, and this has forced us to postpone expenditures. However, we have done well. Okay. The last performance you may have seen is that because we came up with an attractive bond,
yes,
infrastructure bond, we got we were looking for 60
massive
billion.
Subscription.
We got 213 billion, which we have taken. So again, we have done 100% on that front,
yeah,
which means we are going to, even as we go to supplementary, yes, which we did this supplementary because we are anticipating a possibility, because there are timelines when you are doing supplementary. So even as we are in Parliament, we'll still have to look at the numbers given the latest performance.
Okay.
Then KRA has not been performing well because I think by end of May we were doing about 163 billion shillings behind, yes, schedule. And we have this June target of we need about 228 billion. And I think today I was checking, we have done up to 35%.
Okay.
And overall, because now we have been paying, especially with the monies that came from World Bank and others, when we pay is when KRA collects.
Yes.
Because majority of the customers of government is a big spender. Yeah. So when we pay, that is where we collect also the taxes. And so we expect a final push before end of the year. Okay. A pickup such that we may end up with not 100% performance, but I think it will be a final good push.
Yes.
Least, yes.
Let me hold you there and piggyback on the point you've raised there. Granted, I mean, you have closed in on the target you had for domestic financing for the current financial year. But look, you go to market with an infrastructure bond, tax-free inclusive, and it's at 16%. And you saw the warning that came from the central bank, the outgoing governor at least, who said in the next financial year targeting 522 billion, we don't think this domestic market has the capacity to actually meet that target.
Maybe he's a pessimistic. I'm very optimistic myself. And this is my friend, I'll talk to him. But I think if we have managed to do this now, we will. And I can assure you we will. The situation has changed. And in fact, we are going on a lower fiscal deficit. Remember, we are on a fiscal consolidation path. So we were at 5.7% of GDP fiscal deficit. This budget, which has been read today by my cabinet secretary, is a 4.4% GDP. So the target for debt is much lower. We're talking about 718 billion monies that we have to borrow.
Yes. Both
externally and domestically. And I think, especially from the domestic front, we have an IMF program that we have just concluded. And in that IMF program, we have an enhanced allocation of the SDR up to 75% of our allocation.
Yes.
We have a new facility called Resilience and Sustainability Facility, RSF,
yeah,
where we'll also get an additional 75% of SDR. And this is very concessional financing. Yeah. And we have the normal program that we have been having. Now that program has been extended by another 10 months. So the current program will move to 2025. So from where I sit, and then we have also a number of programs where we are working with World Bank in what we call TLI. We work to get disbursement. We have to move away from the situation where we are being told you must do this so that you get the money. No, yeah, it's our voluntary effort. We are saying we will do this reform because it's good for us, not because we are being told to do it so that we get the money.
Okay.
Yes. So I want to assure you, from where I sit, if we have done well now, I think
yeah,
we have come out of the worst. In my view, the future
is bright.
Is bright.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking about the IMF program and conditionalities and the extension, and by the way, the extension of the IMF program was actually predicated on the fact that we were struggling to meet some of our targets. But here's the thing. The CS spoke at length about Kenya Power and the restructuring of the balance sheet, but we all know that Kenya Power is operating within very tight margins because of the environment it is in. What are the immediate actions starting today, given what the CS has said? Are we looking at potentially dialing down the government's stake on Kenya Power?
The truth is, our state-owned enterprises, some of them have been struggling. They have not been performing well. And you don't need anyone to come and tell us to change. It just happens that we need to do it. So we are in agreement that we need to do something about Kenya Power. Kenya Power has been struggling. Its balance sheet has not been one of the best because in the past, Kenya Power has been made to do things which are not commercially viable. For instance, doing last mile, connectivity, rural
was a disaster.
Electrification. And so what we are doing in this restructuring is we are separating the responsibilities. REREC should do the last mile connectivity. And then Kenya Transmission Network, KETRACO, should now do the transport of the power. And so what Kenya Power is going to do is to surrender the assets, transmission lines, to KETRACO.
Yes.
And then we have to find an arrangement where if there is last mile connectivity, it's the responsibility of REREC, not Kenya Power.
Okay.
And a bit of restructuring, which you need to do, you can provide you the details. It's already before cabinet, and I think has been approved.
Okay.
It's a restructuring plan that, in my view, will work.
Okay.
And very soon we'll see Kenya Power be on its profitability. We are also saying, since it's a listed company, private sector should have a say in the board.
Okay.
And we have actually made a decision that they will have at least 2 board members who will be elected in AGM.
Okay.
Yeah, to bring in private sector participation, because these are the shareholders are also private sector. It's a listed company. Government
Absolutely.
is not the only one that is owning Kenya Power.
Before I let you go, one last question, and we have a minute to go, PS. The refinancing of the Eurobond, which matures in June 2024, if you look at the numbers, there's an allocation of about 240 billion shillings. We saw the RFP from Treasury. How far are we with the selection of the lead arrangers?
We finished, we got a response, we did an expression of interest. We got about 16 firms. We selected 6 who have now been issued with RFP, request for proposals. And we expect them to give us their proposals. We will evaluate them and pick one who will lead us into ensuring that we do liability management on the Eurobond. That Eurobond is already part of the 718 billion that has been read by my cabinet secretary today.
Yeah.
And we have a plan. I just want to tell Kenyans, Eurobond, going for another Eurobond is not an option. It's not the only option.
Yeah.
We are looking at bilateral measures, bilateral approach, multilateral, and even syndicated. It could also be buyback. There are many options. Yeah. That's why we need this lead arranger to help us to see. And once it puts on the table the options, then we'll pick the best option available. But what I want to assure everyone is that we will not default. We have to do everything possible to make sure that we meet our obligations as and when they fall due.
Thank you.
Because it is not the best thing for our country to default in its debt.
Treasury Principal Secretary Dr. Chris Kiptoo, unfortunately we have to close it at that point, touching on issues which emerge from the budget, especially the restructuring of the balance sheet of solar electricity distributor, that's Kenya Power. We shall be right back with more, but before that, coming up.